Good morning. Welcome to the Rebuilding Community Post-Pandemic Healing Lessons from Nature webinar. This webinar is being put on by the National Benevolent Association's Older Adults Ministry Innovative Conversation Group. My name is Britt Tane, and I am the Senior Marketing Associate at MBA, and we are happy to partner with Older Adults Ministry to bring you this resource today. At this point, I will turn it over to our co-hosts for the webinar, Jan Aerie and Teresa Spear. Jan, Teresa, take it away.
Thanks so much, Britt. I'm Jan Aerie, and I am so glad to be with you to see you all today. Teresa will be introducing herself and speaking shortly, but as I begin, I just want to tell you that I am the consultant coordinator of the Older Adult Ministries group with the NBA that Britt has announced, and I'm also a gerontologist and a family counselor. So the subject that we are working on today is one that is extremely interesting and intriguing to me, and I think it will be for you as well. Our plan for today is that we will spend the hour. We will invite you to offer some input and ask some questions at two different points, about halfway through and again near the end of our presentation. In between all of that, we hope that you will gain some knowledge and learn some things and also have some ideas or new resources or strategies that might come to mind for you. We're going to cover ways that the pandemic has made us more aware and taught us some things. And then we're going to share with Teresa a meditation that she has created, will offer to us. We'll also talk about strategies and what we can learn and how we might together brainstorm some ways that churches, congregations, or individuals can be involved with our current older adult emphasis within your congregation or within your neighborhood. So with that, I want to say that I have been studying, and Teresa has as well, older adults and their care, but lately, since the pandemic, especially about lessons we can learn from nature. And in studying that and learning some of those lessons, we found we wanted to share that. And one of the things we've learned is that the pandemic is still echoing. It's echoing its way around the world. And the pandemic is still with us in a new way. We might call it an epidemic of distress, especially for older adults or people who are vulnerable. So we'll emphasize some of that today. But it causes me to ask the question, what can we learn from nature? And one of the things we know so well is that a basic and very important step of helping to calm ourselves in stress is meditation. It's thoughtful contemplation. And this, as I mentioned, is something that Teresa is adept with and practiced and has written for us. So she wishes to share with you now, as our opening, a meditation. Teresa.
Thank you, Jan, and good morning, everybody. We're so glad to be with you today, no matter where we are. I am a disciples ordained minister living in the Kansas City area and working with churches in interim and bridge capacities. And as Jan mentioned, one of my focus for ministry is the healing power of nature. And so we want to invite you to a time to take a deep breath, to settle your hearts and souls as we begin our meditation time. In her poem, Wild Geese, Mary Oliver writes, "Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers, itself to your imagination, calls you to, like wild geese, over and over, announcing your place in the world." In all phases of life, it is important to remember that we are God's beloved. Scriptures remind us that God has known us for all time, from the time we were formed in our mother's womb, and God knows us even to the most minute detail. We are invited by God to be part of that which is holy. Nature is our constant reminder of this, for in nature, as David Suzuki reminds us, nothing is considered waste. In those times when we are lonely or unsure of what is to come, all we need to do is look to nature to be reminded that God has formed each part of the world to fit together as one comprised of many parts. And we are part of that. So we invite you now to take a few moments of quiet time to be with God, inviting the holy to sit with you and to speak to your listening heart. Let us pray. Lord, as we watched the world wake up today, the morning moved from its quiet, deep slumber. The yellows and pinks of the sun's rays began to nudge the darkness away. The wind woke the tree leaves, and they began to dance. Lord, wake us in the same way, gently, bathed in your light. Let the warmth of your love nudge at our inner darkness. Let your living water wash over us. Let the wind of your spirit whisper to us, saying, "Come, sit with me." May we linger with you so that we may be renewed. Amen.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I feel calmer already. I hope you all do as well. And in that calmness, we're going to turn ourselves a little bit to talking about some findings about the pandemic and what it may have taught us. I'd like to start with a story of a woman that I have worked with and know. Her name is Diana. This relates to her lessons during a pandemic. Diana is a very strong, outgoing, business-owning woman. She loves to entertain, and she has entertained many times in her home along with her husband. She's the go-to person for lots of questions and for ways for people to find answers. And even when her husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, They continued to entertain, to be great neighbors, but also to bring people to church and to share together in their home. But everything changed during the pandemic. She was not able to reach out and invite people into her home again. Her husband deteriorated some. She found that her business was slowed because it relied on customers. And she was a little bit lost because of the isolation and the loneliness of being a caregiver, the loss that all of us felt in that time. Her husband was hospitalized several times, not with COVID, but because of other circumstances relating to his Alzheimer's. And one of those times, he didn't come home. He died in the hospital alone, without Diana being there, with others nowhere near. And in this trauma, Diana found herself at home, alone, even more so than before. During that time, her pastor would phone, but he could not come to visit. And during that time, others could check in with her, but did not come to visit. She would always say, "I'm fine, I'm fine." But then it wasn't fine, because after a while, Diana experienced some of the same things that many others have experienced. Because you see, people who are vulnerable, who have experienced trauma and have not had the time to process it properly, have not found the calming effect that the body needs. In fact, their central nervous system races to a cascade of reactions that are impossible to stop. And when that happened to Diana, she thought there was something wrong, but she didn't know what to do. Christine Runyon is a doctor, and I've learned from her about some of the effects of trauma in our systems. And we all need to acknowledge that during the pandemic, we experienced some sort of trauma. For older adults in particular, the loss of many, many lives, the impossibility to spend time grieving adequately with others, just created an exacerbated effort, much like Diana experienced. In those kinds of situations, Dr. Runyon says, the mind learns to shut down and to let the body take over. The logical mind shifts away and the person becomes more detached. They become more focused, extremely so, on themselves, and they find it hard to reach out to other people. And this situation that can continue over time is very difficult to work out of, but also it's very difficult on the body, and soon the body begins to break down. These are some of the concerns that we have, especially for our older population. Dr. Runyon also talks about uncertainty, the fact that we all felt that uncertainty, and from that, a lack of control over our circumstance. And certainly Diana felt this too. In that lack of control, she found an image that she later described, which was she felt so isolated and so alone. She felt like a lone tree on an exposed hill in the middle of an ice storm. To me, that's a powerful image. And for her, that was the way she was living her life. Dr. Runyon says that even something as simple as placing our feet flat on the floor, if you try it now, you'll see it has a calming effect. When we are in a fight or flight situation, we're on our toes. We're almost ready to run or to retreat. And this constant stress and ways of trying to navigate really do take its toll. During the time that Diana was home and all of us were also home, Christine Runyon says, there was a massive loss for all of us. around grieving, around so many other ways of navigating our world. But it was a massive loss as well, collectively in our society, of empathy for others. This is a bold statement on her part. What she says is that it created an exaggeration of our dislike for people that are different than we are. Because we chose to face the pandemic and its uncertainty with finding what we knew and not all of the things that change. So in that change that Diana was in the midst of, she needed to travel through that alone, as all the rest of us did. She had no family with her, and she was alone. But over time, she found some ways to navigate it differently. It took her months and months, but by those months and year of time that passed, she had a different choice. She had a choice to connect, and she called this her radical empathy for others. The way that we can group together. By that time, she had a good lesson in what it takes to grieve and how one might be helped by not having to grieve alone. She invited others who had lost their spouses and parents during COVID to come with her in the church. And they sat down virtually together first, and they planned a way with her leadership of creating a grief support effort. It wasn't only a grief support group. It was an effort of outreach, connection, phone calls, and every possible way that with Diana's wonderful business acumen was created into a spreadsheet with monitoring the frequency in which they visited with people or connected with people and the ways that they could support those in grief that she had not received for her. Dr. Runyon emphasizes that when we are in an isolated place like Diana was, we don't want people coming to the house anymore. We maybe prefer a phone call, or maybe not at all. And there are many in our congregations who might be sorting through this kind of effort so far. What we've learned from the pandemic is that we need to come together, just like Diana learned. We need to create those partnerships, those companionships. We need to create what we might call mutual aid societies. And the radical empathy that she learned about is the radical empathy that we can pick up on and use for examples in our own congregations of how we might choose to come together, create companionship one-on-one, in groups, or in several at a time. So I want to stop with that for a moment and invite you to ponder whether there are some questions or thoughts that you have for us at this point, and Teresa will moderate that time for us.
Thank you, Jan. So much imagery there, from the lone tree to I see groups of people gathering together in mutual aid groups. So what questions are bubbling to the top of your mind with this wonderful information that Jan just shared? Is there anything? Susan? And you'll need to unmute, please.
It reminds me of what's going on in the US with so much dislike for the other. I'll just put it that way. And around the world. And it's we're in the middle of 2 wars in the world. We've been in the middle of a war within our United States. And I wondered if this is the reason, if the pandemic has been the trajectory for that. Thank you for all your talking about. I appreciate it.
And thank you for that question, Susan. Just briefly, some would say, yes, absolutely. That is a reason. To me, that is a bit of a comfort. But we also have to acknowledge that long before the pandemic, that dynamic was beginning to show itself. So the pandemic may have created a tipping point, or may have just pushed us along on a path that we don't want to see, but that we're all experiencing now.
Other thoughts or questions?
Question. I've led a number of, grief support groups face to face over the years, but how would you structure this differently if you did a virtual grief support group as opposed to face? What would you do differently than what you would have done at a face-to-face group?
That's a good question. When I was working with people like Diana before pandemic, we were meeting as a support group for caregivers in person, and then it shifted to being online. Part of that, it's difficult, I would say, and it's a challenge, but now these days it's much more of an accepted and acceptable way of communicating in many ways, just like we are. But part of that was to communicate and offer things through email and links online in addition to our face-to-face time, so that there were some resources, some images, some of the kind of thing that Teresa just led for us, so that people had something to carry with them additionally during that week or that month that we met. And that would be one thing that I found workable, but it also then was something that we could pose the question ahead of time, which you could also do in person, but have people think about it to bring to the meeting online. And it just helped, because it's harder, I think, for people to talk, some people anyway, to talk when they're on the computer rather than in person, and vice versa.
Thank you.
Other thoughts and questions? I have one, Jan. When Dr. Runyon was talking about mutual aid groups, did she give any expanded picture of what that might look like?
Yes, I think so, and it will help us later in our conversation too. I love the term. It reminds me of our disciples' men's and women's groups. It's that kind of mutual aid society, or it's the church school class that is in cahoots, are working together. But I think that it comes now to wanting to ask some questions about what is radical empathy, and how do we come toward this in ways that people can feel it. One is to try to create some kind of a meeting or a gathering or a group, whether it's in person or online, that is so enticing, so attractive, that it's almost magnetic. People want to come. And by doing that, I think it's a partnership, in a pairing of people one-to-one, or small groups who have similarities in some ways, and find that they can share and help in each other's lives beyond the study or the support group or whatever it is, in addition to what they're doing. It's kind of, in my mind, is sort of an ideal way of being part of groups.
Thank you.
But yes, and thank you, Teresa. Let's carry on. I know you have a wonderful story to share.
Yes. So I am all about drawing lessons from nature. And I heard stories long ago about the giant sequoias. And to me, they are such an example of regeneration and growth and healing. So I have a story to share with you today about them. You know, as of late, as Susan mentioned, it seems like the world's on fire. And as we continue to experience ripple effects of the pandemic, We're experiencing economic impacts and loneliness and people clashing and news of wars, and it can get really overwhelming. But humanity and the church, it's important to remember, we've seen trials like this before. And like those who went before us, we can continue to seek out places that renew our strength and give us encouragement. And one of the spaces is within nature. Even if we can't be out as much as we were, nature and its story can give us lessons of hope. And a beautiful example of weathering the odds is the giant sequoia trees. These are truly amazing. They are the largest trees on Earth. They can actually grow for more than 3,000 years. That means they were here when Jesus was walking the earth. But one of the most amazing things about the trees is their bark, because it's really thick. It can be up to 18 inches thick, and it's fibrous. And the bark of those trees acts like an insulator against fire's heat. The bark resists burning, and so it protects the tree. And even if the trees do get a little scarred from fires, new growth comes and heals the scar, and the tree continues to live. But what I find so interesting about these trees is that fire is really a necessity to bring a giant sequoia to bring forth new life. These are trees that are born of fire. A fire gives sequoias three things for regeneration. First of all, it clears out the extra overgrowth, and that allows more light and water to reach the ground. And fire clears away all the forest floor debris, so it exposes rich soil that seeds need to sprout and to grow. And fire heats up the cones of the mature sequoia trees. And then those cones open up and they shower seeds that fall into that rich soil. And because those seeds now have soil and water and light, they can germinate and they can survive. And you might imagine that supporting heights of 200 to 300 feet that these trees grow to, they would need an extraordinarily deep root system to anchor it to the ground. But not these trees. Their root systems are, as the National Park Service website described, a flat plate of shallow and sometimes web-like roots. These majestic trees' root systems, they're not deep, they're widespread, and the roots sometimes fuse together. So they share resources, sometimes 200 to 300 feet outward in the ecosystem that seeks out and shares. And so from shallow web-like roots, we learn that even small things are critically important to sustaining our lives and the future of those around us. I like the lessons of these trees. The giant sequoia teaches us that living into our years gives us wisdom and a special kind of stature. The scrapes and the scars of life's fire and time become signs that we've lived and that we know to not only endure difficult times, but understand that they become opportunities to seed new life all around us. And we learn the importance of spreading out, of being connected and intertwined in life, even if we have to spread our roots beyond our normal boundaries. For we can be the ones to share our stories, to point others toward the principles that bring hope and healing. And we know the importance of nurturing new generations that are following us, not overpowering them, but supporting those most closely connected to us, and to spread out new roots, to share our life-giving wisdom and resources. So one of the things we began to talk about earlier was how do we share and stay connected? There's one way is perhaps something that I do. It's a thing that started during the pandemic, and 3+ years later, our little group has shrunk a bit, but there's 6 of us that still keep going. And what we do is we meet every Saturday morning for an hour. And we kind of catch each other up on what's going on in life. And I will tell you, at first, that only took us about 5 minutes to do. Now we're up to about 15 to 30, depending on the day and what's going on. But then we do a poem reading. One of the resources we use a lot is Mary Oliver, as the person I referenced earlier in today's workshop. But we'll read a poem, and then we take 10 minutes of quiet time just to sit and pause and reflect on that poem or that reading. And then we come back together in a group and we share our thoughts about it and what it meant to us. And sometimes it takes us down a completely different path that we share with one another. And in these 3 years, we have built a group of trust and care. And it is a group that even if we are on the road, one of us, we will still call in most of the time, because it has become such an important part of our lives to be connected with one another, to hear a poem, especially we do a lot of nature things, and it restores our souls and makes our weeks just a little bit better. So I want to leave you with this thought, that today, know there's hope. Because if we could compare the church to a sequoia, then we know that God is like the bark, protective and able to provide healing. And when times are tough and fire rains down, that just might be the opportunity to release a piece of ourselves to others and the church, and to continue our future and to further the kingdom of God.
Teresa, that's so powerful. And it puts us right into nature. I am so grateful to you for sharing that. As Teresa mentioned, and I as well, are lovers of nature. And to continue on the pathway that she has started us in the forest, when a fire occurs, although for me in my life, it was a tornado that passed through. But in similar situations, whether it's a natural disaster or it's a fire by accident, there are some things that occur in the forest. And I would like to share those with you. If you listen carefully, we are sharing with you things that you can replicate on your own or with your own group. But there are also ideas that are woven throughout what we're sharing with you that could be implemented in your congregation or with the group or even in your own home. And these are some of those, some strategies and some responses to the pandemic from nature. So we know that birds flock together, but following a fire or a tornado or some such thing, birds somehow have communicated together that they are to gather in great numbers, multiple species, all together at once to help reseed that ground. And not only the sequoias dropping their cones, but other seeds that the birds find are dropped from on high by those birds, who collectively then serve to create the fastest covering of the forest floor that's possible to begin healing. Do we as humans think of doing such a thing? How do we quickly respond to ways that we might offer or start the healing? Just as when you have a cut on your finger and it covers itself with a thin membrane before that healing and scar can continue. The birds do their job to replant those seeds, to create a mat on the ground that's covered with ground cover. But the earth also has a very important natural way of processing itself. And the continuity of this is a pattern, and we see beauty in patterns. So the pattern is once the birds have done their reseeding, next, some larger plants begin to grow, the shrubs, those bushes, not large trees yet, but just the bushes that help to ground the earth in roots. Now the earth is softened and loosened by those new seeds, but it is becoming grounded and networked together by those shrubs. And as Teresa said, trees communicate with each other. So evidently do birds and many other things in nature to work together. Adrienne Brown is a studier of nature, and I learned from her that we all can learn so much about not only the beauty, but also the learning of how this happens within nature. It's all about collective partnerships. The mutual aid is so obvious in nature when we look for it. And it's stunning, as she says, to watch because the patterns are beautiful. And just as we heard about Diana and her choice, she chose eventually to find people to partner with, to create that ground cover of healing, and to begin her own healing with growing some shrubs that would help in her congregation with others who were grieving, along with her and with so many of us. And so another beauteous part of nature that Adrienne Brown talks about is the healing circle. I love this aspect because not only do the birds randomly drop those seeds, they drop them in circles. And they're not large circles, they're small circles. They create them collaboratively in circles that will collect and will most likely sprout. But the intention of each of those circles is to heal the ground, and those healing circles then begin to spread and to grow further and further until they connect with other healing circles until the ground is covered. The healing circle concept to me is one that I would love to implement and see implemented in congregations, that together with that mutual aid concept, we create circles of healing together. Because with the concentration, the collaboration, the finding of ways to partner together, there is the possibility that so much more healing, so much more doing, so much more can be advanced in our Christian faith and in our learning. So another aspect that we learn from nature, besides the beauty, is this pattern of the healing circles. Watch for the patterns, watch for the beauty, look for the ways that nature partners with itself and with each other, and how might we as humans do a better job of that. Well, another aspect, as Teresa spoke of, is the reseeding, the new beginning, the creation of those seeds, which can then grow and expand into something new and different. When we think of those pine cones and we think of the seeds that have been dropped, what do they become in our human endeavors? What do we choose to listen to and to talk about? With our healing circles moving toward reseeding, we can find that we can recreate some aspects. There are some ways that we can learn to compost. What is not working so well anymore? What needs to be recycled? But also, what can we reinvent? Or what can we reinstitute? What can we reseed, just as the forest does for us? And in this way, we can learn again from Diana. She learned from her own experience, but she needed others to talk to share with. And she started to do that by phone, but then again in person. And as they talked and shared together, they became much more creative and much more inventive in what they thought about and what they came up with. So we've learned something else from the pandemic, and that is that older adults and people who have suffered trauma are taking a longer time even now to come back. You may have experienced this in your own church, in your own groups that you might be a part of. But if you look and think about the ways that our communities are not quite inhabited in the same way, at the restaurants, at the movie theaters, the folks that are slow to return are often those who are most fearful or most cautious, most vulnerable, and have good reason to be so. But that challenges us as groups to find ways to connect with them. How can we make something that is so enticing that they want to join us, whether it's in person or not? They have to find their comfort zone in that. And in knowing now, as you do with me, that there are some who are still hesitant, how is it that technology is also preventing them from connecting with us in new ways because they're uncomfortable with the technology as well? There is a woman who shared a beautiful story, though it was a painful one for her, in a congregation where I was sharing a day-long seminar. This was before COVID. She happened to mention that in her recent widowhood, she was really missing having someone to share her meals with. The reason this was so shocking to the rest of the group in her congregation was that she is the most present, outgoing, and actively proponent of their programs, including meals that they hold at the church. But those meals and programs are held maybe once a month. And her comment was, what about all the other lunches, breakfasts, and dinners during the month? This had never occurred to the congregation, and it hadn't occurred to me either. I haven't lived that, but I don't like eating by myself. It spurred that church on to finding ways to ensure that Mary, but everyone else in that situation that they knew, had someone to share a meal with at least once a week. And many times that was not going out, that was coming to, bringing meal to them or inviting them in to their home to be with their family or to be with them as a couple, and sometimes to go to the restaurant. This made a huge difference, not only for Mary and others, but for the whole congregation. They had tuned in. And that's the kind of mutual aid that we're talking about that goes beyond what we might be initially thinking of. Another example is a congregation who has spread the word about establishing memory cafes. These are another way. Have a cafe in your church, invite people to sit around small tables and share memories, and have servers there who are volunteers willing to bring the coffee or the drinks or whatever it is that's being served to those tables while people share those memories. Another congregation has been sharing their stories of memories as older people with the children in the church school. They've created videos, and now they have a whole archive that is pulled out, reminisced upon, and repeated as often as the children want it to happen. So these are some specific ways that we can think about being mutual aid societies, creating healing circles, and finding ways to collaborate and be in partnership together. And right now we're going to stop again, just so that we can spend a little bit more time with you doing some brainstorming and some questions or answers that you may have as well. Teresa?
Yes, lots of good food for thought there, Jan. So we would like to open it up to you now to share, expand on other ideas that may have sprung from items and ideas that Jan shared, or share something that your church might be doing, or to ask a question. So I'm going to open it up for you all. Judy? Hi.
At my church during the pandemic, in addition to
going online with our worship on Sunday, we started our pastor started a Tuesday evening check-in group, which was really important, I think, for people. Probably the most that ever attended it were maybe like 12 or 14, but you know, ours is a small congregation anyway. We usually had like 25 to 30 people on the worship on Sundays when we were online. And that group still exists. We moved to a different night and we have a different agenda now. We still check in, and then sometimes we do Lectio Divina, sometimes we watch videos and respond to them and that sort of thing for an hour. And it's now a nucleus of some 6 to 8 folks. And again, we don't like to miss it. And we've talked, and it just hasn't taken hold yet. And this just reminds me of that we felt like we needed to offer opportunities that met at a different time than Monday night or Tuesday night that could be online. We've talked about reinstituting story circles. We've talked about reinstituting compassionate listening group, although we don't have a person who is an official facilitator to lead it. You know, we're still searching for ways to establish these kinds of connections. And now we're looking at the future of the congregation and whether we're going to merge with somebody else or whatever else we're going to do, because we're going to put our building up for sale. And so, you know, I'm feeling this tension, and I'm also feeling this lack of being able to offer people the kinds of connections that we're talking about here. And so if others have ideas, or if we could just all pray each other into, you know, greater enlightenment about it, I think that would be great.
Susan?
My question is similar to Judy's in that what are the questions you would recommend for beginning such a group?
So, Jan, I know that we've done some work on establishing like a grief support group. And I'm wondering if there are pieces of that might be able to translate and help with some establishment of other groups, like the Healing Circle. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to. And also love hearing your questions, but also interested in hearing what others have done or what others think of that too, because I think there are probably some answers within the group. My first thought is going to be the kind of like, well, no-brainer. It's to invite some people that you would choose specifically, and those are not necessarily the leadership of your church, but you could include them as well. Invite some people and ask them to share what their view is about their life, their experience, the church, and just listen. I think that the whole listening aspect is just so important. And sometimes we kind of lay upon older adults, as an example, what we think they need. A good example of that is a congregation who called the pastor to serve in their congregation, not learning ahead of time that his wife is unable to ambulate on her own, and their congregation is in a many stairs situation. And so he accepted the call, but she is not able to participate. And that's an extreme example, perhaps, but I think listening is just the beginning. I think that another way would be to ask some key questions, some ponderous questions, perhaps. And I would maybe just a short commercial here so we don't prolong my answer too much. watch the webinar on how to start a support group. Not that you want to necessarily start a support group, if that's not what you wish to do, but a communication group or something like that. We're sending you a resource list tomorrow by email. So tomorrow you will receive that. And when you look on the website with the NBA, you will see that there is a webinar on that topic. There are some other key questions I'm sure that we could come up with to ask, but I'll stop at that point and we will see whether maybe we can include some more answers in a better fashion through that email tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes. So I just last week attended the Pause Play conference, the first one that they had for pastors, and a lot of the discussion was about the healing of playing games together, the connections that are made when people come together and play board games, play outdoor games, play all kinds of games. And it was very powerful. As pastors, you know, we often don't take the time to do that. And I saw what a powerful thing that could maybe be in our church for older people who need something to do during the day. Not always are they interested or comfortable going to the senior center because, of course, you know, that's an option. But this gives them an opportunity with others that they know on a closer basis from the congregation to come together. When you play games, you don't think of anything else. Like, you're focused on that. It's a great way to reduce stress and I would say even grief. So it was powerful.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't me, but I have a friend, and what she does at her church is that once a week, between a certain time, anybody who wants to just comes to the church and hang out. They can bring their knitting, crocheting, carving, whatever. They just come together and gather and talk. And it's to be going really well at her church. So
That's a great
Beautiful.
idea too.
Mm-hmm. We love that. We are almost to the end of our hour. And so I'm jumping in, Teresa, just to say that we would love to continue to hear back from you. And I am so grateful to Teresa and Britt for enabling us to work together to offer this to you. I want to leave you with a final thought, but before I do that, to send good wishes to you and a reminder that tomorrow we will email you, so look for that. And also be sure you respond back if you have questions or wishes for additional webinars that you would like us to offer. So here's my question. What if we learn from nature and we think about how we can learn from the trees? What if we decide that we are going to look for our highest, most joyous possible way to reach out and connect to others, to emphasize resiliency, emphasize the branching out, as well as the interlacing of the roots of the trees that we see around us? And what if we remind ourselves that even a tree that falls to the ground, it doesn't go away. It simply changes. It's recreated. It becomes something new. It becomes mushrooms. It becomes compost. It becomes fungus. It becomes dirt. We as congregations are very challenged at this time in our lives to be the trees, to be nature, but to be the ways that we can recreate and renew and rebranch and reinterpolate. So think about those words and the ways that we've shared today. And I would like to just close with a brief prayer, if you share with me. Oh God, in the blessings of this day, we know we are surrounded by nature. And we also know that many times in our busy life, we forget to see it. As you bless us and continue to bless us through our lives and ministry, our caring and compassionate ways that we are connecting with others, help us to also see how we are renewed and blessed with your love through nature, through others, and through our sharing. Amen. Blessings, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.